Confident Eaters. I am back with another guest today. We have Sabrina Magnan on today, and I'll let you introduce yourself and say hi to everyone.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to just share things that are going to be helpful for your listeners. As you said, I'm Sabrina. I am a women's relationship with food coach. I help women heal decades of food obsession, disordered eating, overeating by doing the root cause work of what's going on beneath the surface of those symptoms. The identity work, subconscious work, and then a big piece of what I do is nervous system regulation and how that can help you live a life that is so much more free and so much more peaceful around food.
And I think her work is so important in today's day and age when so many of us are stressed out and dysregulated and just go, go, go all the time. So can you tell us a little bit more about your story and how you came into this work? Because I know that you've had your own struggles, and I'd love to hear about what helped you along the way and what things didn't.
Yeah, so I will try to make this a long story short, but like most women, and I'm just like you who have done this work, I had my own history of struggling with disordered eating. So I had periods of binging, and then I had periods of orthorexia, where I had this deep, deep obsession with health, or at least what I thought was health at the time, over exercising, restricting 1,200 calories, and all of it was to feel a sense of control or groundedness, or I was doing everything, the calorie counting, the cutting out foods, because I thought that once I hit my goal weight, which there wasn't even a number that I can think of that would have been small enough for me to feel like I finally have arrived. But I thought that once I get to that weight, I am finally going to feel happy. I'm finally going to feel confident and loved. And what really started happening, and university was when it got really bad, was I ended up getting to that 30 pounds underweight body, and my hair was thinning out. I was cold all the time and I was miserable. I had this wake up call at my sister's baby shower where I ended up binging the entire time. This day that was supposed to be so happy and so joyful, all I remember was the food. There's a picture of my sister opening her presents and I'm on my phone. And I remember I was putting everything I had eaten into my Fitness Pal to feel like a sense of relief of maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought it would, and maybe the damage that I've done isn't too bad. I remember sitting in my parents' basement that night and feeling just the worst physically, mentally. It was like this moment of realization of here I was doing all of these things that I thought were going to make me feel healthy and happy and make my life better. But my life was worse than it had ever been. I was more miserable, more isolated, more anxious. It was this disconnect of like, what am I doing all of this for, if not that? Long story short, I ended up going to Italy that summer because I needed to just get out of this controlling mind and body that I was in. And anyone who has ever struggled with anxiety, perfectionist tendencies, and this kind of hyper controlling personality knows that it starts to feel like this straitjacket. It starts to feel like it has so much control over you that no matter how much you want things to be different, you can't think your way out of it. And so I ended up going to Italy that summer because I was absolutely terrified to do it, but I had always wanted to go. I had this fear of gaining weight and having to eat all of these foods that I was not allowing myself to have. I remember my brother didn't realize at the time how much that comment would affect me, but him being like, how are you going to do it? You're going to gain so much weight. You're going to have to eat bread and pasta and gelato. That was a huge fear of mine, but I knew like if going to a country and eating food is that scary, you need to do it because that's not normal. And so when I was in Italy, I started seeing what a healthy relationship with food looked like. And no one was talking about calories and no one was like burning off their gelato. And it was a real shift. And I wouldn't say that summer just healed me, but it planted a seed that maybe things can be different. And maybe I can be healthy and I can be happy without food being this thing that I have to control and hyper manage all of the time. So when I got back from that trip, trip, I was so committed. I was like, whatever I need to learn about this, I'm going to dive deep and I'm going to learn everything there is to know to heal myself. And because I know that there are so many women out there who are also struggling, and I know that you've seen this too in your story of like the information out there is incomplete at best and really, really harmful. And so I wanted to be able to dive deep into what was really going on beneath the surface and then help others with it. So that's kind of the long-winded way of how I got to where I am now.
Yeah, I can totally relate to when you're talking about putting everything into MyFitnessPal. Like I did the same thing too, where that is hard to log. And I'm like, my people think that when they come into this, oh my gosh, it's going to be so hard and it's going to take so much willpower. I'm like, you have the most willpower. You were putting in the most effort because you've been logging
Yeah.
3,000 calorie binges into MyFitnessPal. Like you can clearly do anything. if
Yeah,
can do
you are trying hard enough.
Yeah.
You are even trying a little too hard.
Yeah, and I love your Italy story too. And I love just the culture in Italy around food too. I'm sure that was really healing to see just like everyone eating very slowly and mindfully. And I actually have an episode way back in my podcast I interviewed one of my friends who is part Italian, and she actually studied the food culture in Italy. It was so fascinating to see how they think about food. But, also they eat differently. Their food is processed a bit differently. It's higher quality. But it's really healing, I think, to see that you can eat pasta and bread and pizza, and they have one of the lowest obesity rates in Europe
Yes.
and around the world of modern countries. And so it's like, okay, clearly like carbs aren't the problem here. If carbs alone were the problem, like everyone in Italy would be like massively overweight. And that's not the case. And so
Yeah.
I think it's like a really good example too, to see like, oh, like different cultures exist outside of the diet culture BS of the US that are really healthy and happy and treat food differently. And it's like, maybe I can do that too.
And I remember seeing the bowls of pasta that they would serve me. And I was like, what is this? There's like 3 pieces of pasta in here. And that was really helpful too, to make me realize like, oh yeah, I don't need these massive portions to be satisfied. And the slower you go, the more present you are with your food, you're gonna notice like, oh, my body tells me when it's had enough and it's not as much as I think that it needs.
Yeah. So you're an expert on the nervous system. Tell us, for someone who is like, I don't even know what the nervous system is, like, what does that mean? And why is it important to know about?
Yeah. So your nervous system is basically your innate, it comprises of your brain stem, your spinal cord, and then all of the nerves that you have in your body. Your nervous system is responsible for keeping you alive. And so you've got your autonomic nervous system, and I don't want to go too much into the science because even that sometimes confuses me. And so a really helpful way to look at it is your autonomic nervous system is your automatic nervous system. It is that branch of your nervous system that does things without you having to think about it. You don't have to think about breathing. You don't have to think about blinking. All of these things are being done outside of your conscious awareness. And your nervous system is constantly scanning for threats. This is called neuroception, and it's always scanning for your environment. So a way that I like to explain it is if you go to a party and you don't know many people there, the first thing you start looking at is like, who do I know? Who are my connections? Who are my friends that I feel safe around? And you also look at people's faces. Who don't I know? Who looks friendly? Who doesn't look friendly? Who do I go towards and who do I go away? So you're always looking in your environment for what's safe and what's dangerous. You're also looking within yourself. So we don't really think about this, but there's always this scanning system of, do I feel good right now? Do I feel a knot in my stomach? Do I feel this pit? Do I feel pressure on my chest? Do I feel this tension in my shoulders? And so we often think that we can just think our way out of anxiety, out of guilt, out of shame. And there's a lot of people who talk about mindset, and mindset is very important. But the information that travels through your body, there's only 20% of information that travels from your brain down to your body, which means that you have 80% of the information that is traveling from your body up to your brain. And so oftentimes what people will experience is they start feeling anxious or they start feeling stressed, but they don't know why, then your brain has to interpret those signals and get a clear message of like, oh no, I'm feeling anxious in my body. Therefore, it must be because of this. And so much of the work that we have to do around healing our relationship with food, being able to stop binging, emotional eating, but mostly being able to feel safe around making the changes that you need to make, that you know that you need to make for your relationship with food, is about working with your body, working with your nervous system. Because if your nervous system does not feel safe to stop counting calories, but you know that counting calories is not helping you, it's gonna start to feel compulsive. It's going to start to feel like I know better, but I cannot for the life of me seem to do the thing that I know will make me better. And it's because somewhere deep inside, your nervous system has associated that thing, whether it's stopping counting calories, stop restriction, stop dieting, stop binge eating, as something that will be threatening to your survival.
That is so fascinating, especially the part of what really stood out to me is the 80% going from our body to our brain. And I think a lot of us have experienced this naturally without really knowing what was happening, where we're like, oh, I noticed something there, like a little twinge in my body, a little feeling there that came up before like I even know what was happening. And this is actually something that we learned about in my coach training was to always, I'm always looking for people's body language because they taught us our body will tell us first what someone's thinking. Before a client even says like, oh, that's really good, I'll see them be like, oh, like I can see their body will tell us that they've got something or that they don't have something. So can you tell us a little bit more about, I think this has been thrown around a lot, like a dysregulated nervous system and what that means to have it be dysregulated and how that impacts our eating and our food decisions.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is it's normal for your nervous system to be dysregulated. Like that is a normal survival response. If you imagine that we're going back thousands of years ago and you're like a caveman walking in the desert, suddenly you go from being calm and present and connected and safe, and then a lion comes around the corner. It is very adaptive to go into fight or flight, to go into survival mode, where all of your energy is going to go to your extremities so that you can survive the threat. That is your fight or flight. If you are running for very long periods of time and you are being exposed to that threat for a prolonged period, then eventually your nervous system is going to go into a shutdown mode because it doesn't believe that it can fight the threat. And that is where you freeze, where you feel disconnected, where you feel lethargic. So in the example of that lion, you would go hide behind a rock and then you would conserve as much energy as possible. So it's a very adaptive thing for our nervous system to have all of these different states. The problem is that as humans, we are able to trigger a survival state by thought alone, which means that we don't know how to differentiate what is actually life-threatening from getting an email from your boss. And 70% of the time in the Western world, people are living in some kind of dysregulated state, in some kind of survival mode. I don't want to go too much into the science of it, but it could be the safe and connected mode, which is that is where you want to be as much of the time as possible. It could be that fight or flight. It could be your freeze response. And it could also be a response called fawn. And that you can think of as people pleasing. This can show up a lot in your relationship with food as well, where maybe you grew up in an environment where your parents were very unpredictable and you didn't know what state they were going to be in. So you learned as a survival response that I have to be hyper aware of other people's needs, of other people's opinions, of other people's state. So I will make myself palatable. I will make myself small. I will make my needs small so that I can keep myself safe. And so we see that in people who have a really hard time saying no to food, because to say no to food and to have boundaries, for example, feels really unsafe. And so we have all of these different states and we start to become hyper aware of these dangers that don't really exist, like tracking calories. That can be a response to, I am so scared of gaining weight because I have associated gaining weight with being isolated from my family or being isolated from my friends or being judged by society, that it is safer for me to live in this chronic state of anxiety and hypervigilance with food than it is for me to allow myself to potentially gain some weight and have to face the isolation that I would face.
Mhm. Right, and it's the perceived idea of that threat too, right? Because that's what our I can't remember the exact words you used, but it was something along the line of perceived where it's
Mhm.
not a real threat, right?
Mhm.
Where most of the time, I guess I think that's another part of it is it could be a real threat. Maybe it has been a real threat in the past, but then it's like trusting our inner resiliency that the threat is not going to kill us, that it's
Mhm.
not a lion that's going to eat us, that we would handle it if it did happen too.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that one thing that I found to be so helpful when I learned about the nervous system is that when you're in survival mode, you are not thinking about how is this decision right now going to affect me 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now,
Mhm.
3 years from now. Your ability to think in the long term goes offline because in that moment, it's just how do I get through the day? And I know that anyone can relate to this. When you are going through a really busy, really overwhelming time in your life, your ability to think rationally, to think critically, to think about how do I want to improve my life,
Mhm.
you don't have that capacity because in that moment, it's just like, how do I deal with everything that is coming at me in my life? And so, this is why it is so important to start living your life through that nervous system lens and to increase your capacity. Because when you have no capacity, you can't work on improving your life. You can't work on your goals because you don't have the mental capacity for it. You're just trying to get through the day.
Mhm. I thought of this example where I think it's like a happy dog that when you mentioned that it's normal for our nervous system to be unregulated at times or, it's gonna be part of life. It's like trying to get our life like a happy house dog where you're treated well, you are fed well, you're watered well, like really good care. You go outside for walks. But there's gonna be times where like that intruder dog still walks past your house and you're like, oh my gosh, something happened. But then they settle down, they're fine. Like they have a good
Yeah.
happy life. I feel like that would be like the equivalent of where we want to get to, where it's like things are still going to trigger us, things are still going to come up, but we take really good care of ourselves through that.
And what a beautiful example because you can see this in rescue dogs who had a really rough past. And what ends up happening is their nervous system starts being on higher alert and starts having those more extreme reactions. So that's why we see people who have experienced a lot of trauma at a young age. You have this hypersensitive danger detector. Whereas, like, if you can imagine that you have a security alarm in your house, that every time it felt just a gust of wind, it would start going off. It's like there's no actual danger coming up here, but it's being triggered over and over and over again. And so when we talk about a healthy nervous system, it's not a nervous system that never dysregulates. It's a nervous system that is flexible. It's where you can experience that stress. You can experience that stressful work meeting and then bring yourself back to a regulated place. And you can experience a hard conversation with your kid and then bring yourself back to a regulated place instead of staying stuck in those dysregulated survival states.
Yeah. So let's say someone does feel stuck there. They just feel like they're in survival mode. They just cannot catch a break. They've lost their job. They're getting divorced. Like all these things are happening and they just feel like so out of it. And then on top of that, they're also struggling with food. They're counting calories, they're restricting, they're binge eating at night, and they just feel like, they're stuck in that. Is there a way out of that? And how do people get into where they can get back down?
Absolutely, there is a way out of that. And I wouldn't even start with the food piece until we address the foundation, because the food piece is a side effect, right? It is what we go to in order to feel a sense of safety, a sense of control, a sense of relief. And so, in the world that we live in, I would say the biggest thing that I see is people engage in these habits on a daily basis that are inherently extremely dysregulating. So, you wake up, you pick up your phone, you look at the news of the world. Of course, that's going to send danger signals to your body. And you go through the entire day where you have no silence, no space, no time for yourself. You're always listening to something on the radio, you're listening to the news, you're listening to podcasts and music, and there's no space. You are always taking care of other people's needs. You're not prioritizing your sleep. You're having a black coffee instead of eating breakfast. So there's those foundational physical needs that we need to look at first. Because before, if we look at just like the way that human beings evolve, we can't think about those higher level reasoning, emotional responses, your mindset, if your physical body is not getting its needs met. So that's where you want to start looking at your sleep, your nutrition. Can you create any kind of space, whether it is 5 minutes to be with yourself? One of the things that I talk about with my clients is transition rituals. So let's say that I just ended my workday and I have a date night with my boyfriend, Luke. I need minimum 15 minutes where I can just decompress and I can be with myself and I don't jump from one thing to another. And so many people are just jumping from one thing to another to another. And I know that when you have a family and when you work full time, and in the world that we live in, there's people who are working 3 jobs, living from paycheck to paycheck. So that feels extremely stressful. And some people are living in a actual state of survival where they don't know when's the next time they're going to get paid. And so what you want to look at first is, what do I have control over? Because let's say you did just lose your job. There are things that you could be doing in order to create safety within your body. Well, what that's going to do is it's going to give you more capacity to think outside of the box, to think about options that you never would have thought of. I think about my work all the time. The times where I'm experiencing a problem that is persistent, that I cannot seem to find a solution for, what I don't need to do is double down and like think my way into that solution. I need to go out in nature. I need to disconnect. I need to have a regulated state. And it's from that place that I'm going to be able to get answers that I never would have been able to think my way to.
So important. Absolutely. And I think we're always taught that we just need to action our way out of it and just try harder and do more. But that's really not the way to go about so many things, especially when we do live in a society that already encourages that so heavily.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking of a situation that I remember running up to in my journey where I had stopped restricting some. I was eating more food, but I remember there was like this one thought around fruit. And I was so nervous to start eating more fruit. And I don't know what diet culture thought had got into me about bananas. All of the things, and fruits are truly such a nutritious food. Like there's no arguing that for most people, fruit is extremely nutritious. So how would you use nervous system regulation and overcoming these fear foods in a situation like this when someone is like, I know logically and deep down that a banana could be healthy for me and it could have a lot of nutritional value, but I just am really scared to start eating that food?
What a good question. Okay. The first thing I would say is, when you think about eating that fruit, how does that feel in your body? Because that anxiety and that fear is often a somatic experience. So, how does that feel in your body? Where do you feel the fear? Where do you feel the anxiety? Because so many people, especially when you've lived your life according to rules, according to external noise, not only are you disconnected from your hunger and your fullness cues, you're disconnected from your body as a whole. You are so not used to being in your body that you don't know what you're feeling. A really great example, and I will come back to it, but I've been feeling really anxious for the past 2 to 3 weeks, and I didn't know why. So I needed to be able to tap into, okay, where do I feel this anxiety in my body? And once you find it, you're like, okay, I'm feeling this fear. When I think about bananas and strawberries, I'm feeling this fear. It's like this pit in my stomach. Maybe it's like tension in my shoulders. Okay, you want to stay with that. And you want to be able to first create space in your body. Breathing can be really helpful because it stimulates your vagus nerve, which brings you back into more of a regulated state. You can take a couple of deep breaths and picture yourself sending space into those areas in your body. Because it's really hard to have a conversation with yourself when you're feeling frustrated with yourself that you're afraid of eating fruit and you're like, I know this is stupid. And then you just dysregulate yourself even more. So it's really hard to have that conversation. So you want to ground yourself. You want to bring yourself to a state where there is openness, there's expansiveness. And then once you find it in your body, you basically want to have a conversation with that part of you. And you hear this all the time. There's a part of me that knows this. And there's another part of me that knows this, because you do operate with all of these different parts within yourself. You're not just this one uncomplicated whole that knows one thing. There's going to be these conflicting experiences. So there is obviously a part of you that is afraid of eating fruits and that has created a story about what it means if you do eat it. If you imagine you have a child who is trying to communicate with you that it is scared and that it has this fear and it feels like it's in danger, instead of getting down on a knee and listening and being like, talk to me, what's coming up for you? Instead, you are just like, can you shut up and go in the corner and just sort your stuff out? That child will just become more extreme because it's going to want your attention. So we have to treat those different fears within ourselves in the same way of like, you need my attention right now. What are you afraid is going to happen if I start eating fruit? And then listening to what story it tells you. What I call it is follow the thread. So follow the thread of how bad it gets in your mind of that worst case scenario. If I start eating fruit, then my blood sugar is going to spike like crazy. Maybe I'm going to develop diabetes. Maybe I'm going to gain 10 pounds. Sometimes when you follow that thread, and what I always tell my clients is don't filter it. Don't stop yourself when you start saying it out loud and you're like, whoa, this sounds ridiculous. It will most likely sound ridiculous because these are the worst case scenarios. Your nervous system is always anticipating the worst case scenario because anything better than that, you will be able to survive. And so we have to actually bring our awareness up to what is the worst case scenario that I'm living into on a daily basis that is creating this fear and anxiety. Because what can be really helpful when you do this is you do realize how nonsensical it is. You realize how unlikely it is to happen. Once you've done that work, and you've really followed the thread. And sometimes I'll do this exercise with my clients and they end up alone. Their entire family has left them. Their husband has left them. Some people are in a hospital bed. They're 400 pounds. Like it
All from eating
get,
a banana.
Yeah. Like it can get really, really deep. And what you want to understand by doing this exercise, and you can do this exercise with any goal in your life, is that if there is a part of you that has associated your goal with something life-threatening or something dangerous or something extremely negative, then you're going to keep experiencing what you would call self-sabotage, where you're like, I know I want this thing, but for some reason, every time I start working towards it, I get in my way and I do these habits that I don't want to do. If your goal is associated with something negative, then you will always self-protect. So what you actually want to start doing is, once you know what that worst case scenario is, well, if we're going to be delusional about the worst case scenario, let's be delusional about the best case scenario, because your nervous system has not had a clear picture of how it could actually be a really positive thing. So you would start taking yourself through, okay, well, what if I start eating bananas and I actually have more energy? And as I'm doing this, I feel better in my body. And wow, I realize after a couple of weeks of doing this, I haven't gained a single pound. And because I start feeling comfortable and safe around bananas, I start exploring more fruits. And then as I start doing this, my diet gets healthier and I feel healthier and I can go out to dinner. And in the same way, you follow that thread all the way down. Well, now, like you were talking about associating putting a stop to binging with something positive, well, now you're associating this goal with something that actually feels safe for your nervous system to do.
I love that. There was so much good stuff in there. And I think all of that comes back to connecting it into your body too. Like when you started with processing the emotion, that can help you also be more in tune with your hunger and fullness. And like, how does fruit and bananas feel in your body? And then noticing the positive impacts in that. So awesome. So can you share with the people where they can find you and any final thoughts that you want to leave people with?
Yeah, so they can find me at my podcast, at the Live Unrestricted podcast, where I go deep into all of this. They can also find me on Instagram at Sabrina Magnan Health. I have a group program called Food Freedom Academy, and any way that they want to connect or work with me, they can find me on Instagram. Any last words? I would say spend some time connecting to the fears that come up for you. My life started changing when instead of just focusing on my goals, which obviously your goals always sound good. Your goals always sound positive in your conscious mind. But if there is a heavy amount of resistance in your body, if there is a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety, then you're gonna keep feeling, and I know we've all felt this before, where you're like fighting yourself. It's like this daily battle between what you want and the fears that are holding you back. So what I started doing, and this could be an exercise that you guys start doing as well, is whenever you think about your goal, whether it's to stop binge eating or to stop restricting, to notice what resistance comes up in your body, to put a hand on it, to breathe into it, and to just do what we just did and have a conversation with it. Open up a dialogue of like, what are you afraid of? What do you want me to know? And you are going to notice that there is some wisdom within you that you had no idea was there. And you're going to start working with yourself instead of against yourself.
I love that. Yeah, your fears have so much value and there's so much there to explore that's worthy of being explored that can be really helpful for us if we stop being afraid of our fears, right? It's
Yeah.
like it creates more fear when we're scared of our fears.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Sabrina. This was amazing. I'm sure everyone got so much value. And yeah, thank you again. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. This is great.